Anybody who doesn't know already, Patrick, he really gets into the details, and he likes to save money, and
So what this guy was trying to do was see if my well would run dry. Well, so it wasn't 3 months later that my well ran dry, so I should have let him do his job. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on homes. This is Senior Editor Patrick McCombe. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Millham.
Hello.
And Rob Wotzak, Digital Brand Manager.
Hi.
You all can email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and we'd be grateful if you did. You can also find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. So, you may have noticed that Justin is not here today. He is doing something very important, I'm sure, and he left us here without any adult supervision. So we'll see if he lives to regret that.
He does.
We are joined by a new / old Fine Homebuilding staffer, Rob Wotzak. So, Rob, you ran the Fine Homebuilding website in addition to other things for several years, right?
Yeah, I was at Fine Homebuilding for about 4 years, and before that, I was about a year and a half green building advisor in the early days of GBA.
Working with Martin.
Yes,
he's been on the show. Everyone should know Martin by now. And what did you do between the time you left that job and now?
So I feel like my whole life I've just been bouncing around between talking about what I do and doing stuff. So like so I was an editor for about almost 6 years, and then I kind of got the bug, like many of the home building folks seem to have over the years.
And you actually went and got a real job.
Got out to go back and work with my hands again. So for the past 4 years since I've been away, I've been a cabinet maker. I've done set construction.
Didn't you have a stint doing weatherization work for a spell too?
Yeah, that only lasted about 2 weeks.
I glossed over that.
No, it was one of those Connecticut energy fund subsidized home energy solutions audit companies, and it just wasn't exactly what it was sort of portrayed to be. I mean, those programs are great. I mean, I actually just had one of those done myself on my house just this past week, and was surprised to see what they were able to accomplish, even though I was really familiar with the process in a couple of hours.
That's cool.
But
and you worked at a cabinet shop?
Yeah, for about a year I worked at a cabinet shop. I'd been a carpenter pretty much my whole life. I mean, before I came to Fine Homebuilding, sort of the reason, what brought me there was working in a residential remodeling company that specialized in historic preservation, working on old homes. And so, really dug into a lot of the problems that older homes sort of amplify compared to hopefully most of the newer homes. And
that's what we talk about here. It's like a good thing.
So, did a lot of research on my own in those early years, and was always stumbling upon Taunton and Building Science Corporation, another resource that I went to a lot, who ended up, working closely with once I got the job at Green Building Advisor.
So you're going to have to tell me exactly what a digital brand manager does.
So, still starting to figure that out myself, but basically before I was when I was at Taunton, I was a web producer for Fine Homebuilding and Green Building Advisor, where I was down in the trenches, making everything happen on the website. And I kind of see my new position as I'm still hands-on with the web and social media and any other related topics, but it's more of a production and curation sort of position. So it's more tapping into my experience and knowledge about what the important topics are to cover and making sure that we do it well. Are
you making content, or is it a way to use the resources we have in a different way?
I think it's combination. I'm probably going to be using a lot of the resources we have to make sure we're producing the content we need on the web, and working closely with you guys so that we can translate stuff that works well in print onto the website.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for being here, and welcome back to Fine Home Building.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
What have you been working on, Matt? Last time we had a podcast, we talked a lot about your wet basement, and have we had any movement on that front?
Yeah, possibly a little bit. So we had a guy come out and do an estimate to see how much it would be to extend the B-Dry system that's in the basement.
Just some guy you had come out and look?
Just some guy from B-Dry. It's going to cost, just to extend the system, 37 feet is going to cost more than the entire initial system when it was installed 26 years ago. And that's mostly because labor rates have gone up so much.
I bet.
Because this would be a much easier install than
the one that was done prior.
Yeah, they had put in a bunch of vertical I-beams because there was some bulging in the walls, and this would involve none of that. This is just water coming in. But we may have possibly discovered another reason the water was coming in, and that is that the cover on the window well had shifted, and it's possible that the water was getting in there. We haven't been able to verify that yet, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that's it, because that's like a
phenomenal news, right?
Yeah, a free fix.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, but we'll see. And then the sump, the line for the sump pump, the end of it is buried somewhere, which we discovered in this process, and so been digging that up.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's great. Goes right underneath a locust tree. So
of course it does.
That probably wasn't there when the thing was installed. So, yeah, a lot of roots.
So would you, if this proves to not be a simple fix by reinstalling the cover over your basement window well, would you move forward with the waterproofing system from the B-Dry company?
I think I would, because as far as I can tell, it's working in the whole rest of the house where it was installed. I mean, we haven't had any problems with water coming in those other areas. I guess my main thing is it seems like a relatively easy thing for me to do myself. When I say easy, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You just take out about a foot of the slab back from the wall, rent the jackhammer.
You and I clearly have different standards for easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that it's not labor intensive, because it is. You gotta, get maybe a wet saw or some kind of concrete saw, jackhammer,
and then still take 50 trips with 5-gallon buckets to get all that stuff
out of the basement.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's probably worth the almost $4,700 to have somebody else do it, because I don't really want to be hauling all that stuff out. But yeah, so if it came down to it, I would have them do it. But there's been so much flooding in the whole area where I live. These guys are backed up until the end of February, as far as I understand. So we wouldn't be able to get it in for months.
Oh, I figure the ground will be frozen then, so you'd be all set, right?
Hoping. Yeah.
I had a little project this past Sunday actually helping Carrie, who is our sometimes producer of the podcast when Jeff is doing Jeff things, visiting the video equipment rallies and stuff that he goes to on the weekends.
Yeah.
But she had me over to fix her ridge shingles on her roof. She has a pretty complicated roof with a cross gable arrangement with a shed dormer on the back, and the majority of a large percentage of the ridge shingles were all cracked. And this was discovered when she found that there were flying squirrels in her attic. I'm not making this up.
They're super cute.
You have experience with flying
squirrels. I have a lot of experience with flying squirrels related to my cats bringing them inside all the time.
I'm pretty sure I've never even seen a flying squirrel, so.
Yeah.
What are they like?
They're like chipmunk-sized, gray. They have like dark circles around their eyes and big flat tails and sort of, I don't know, like extra skin between their front and back legs.
That almost sounds terrifying.
And when they spread their arms and legs, they kind of look like a big napkin, right? They're just rectangular.
They look almost like a tiny little rug or like trivet,
So she obviously couldn't have the squirrels living in her attic, so she had a guy come out, a pest control contractor, and he sealed up the ridge vents, which it turned out is how they were getting in the house. And he pointed out to her that a lot of the cap shingles were cracked and needed to be replaced. Interestingly, the rest of the roof is in really good repair, so I went up there and put new cap shingles on, and it was one of those experiences where you say to yourself, if the person who had done this before had just done their job the right way, none of this would have been necessary. And I think we all have those experiences. But I'm assuming a roofer, only fastened the cap shingles to the corrugated plastic ridge vent. So the only thing that was holding them there was this plastic corrugated material. And I'm sure with the sun beating on them and the flexing from temperature changes and stuff, because they weren't fastened to the roof, probably made this a problem when it would not have been otherwise.
So it was just a matter of using the right length nails.
Yeah, so they used 1 1/4 roofing nails that they probably fired from their normal roofing gun, nailer, and they didn't bother to change the nails. So be mindful of that, folks. When you have roofing work done or are doing it yourself, that is not the right way to do it. The nails should be long enough to go into the sheathing and
penetrate probably all the way through if you're in a high wind zone and maybe just about anywhere.
Yeah, anywhere.
Yeah.
And that means you need 2.5 or 3 inch roofing nails. And it's not hard work. My legs were killing me from sitting on the ridge for, hours. But that was fun. I like getting dirty and doing roofing.
Nice. Yeah, I mentioned before, one of the things I've done in the past couple of years since I've been gone was set construction. It was actually more for retail interiors and trade shows, but it kind of got me in the mindset. It's kind of funny going from cabinet shop to set construction because, it's going from perfection to as long as it looks good for 2 weeks.
From a distance.
That's all
on
we
TV.
need to worry about, yeah. So I had an appraisal done recently to refinance and,
refinance your house.
Yeah, refinance my house. So when you're young and you get your first house and you're really idealistic, it's like you want to do every single project perfectly. And I kind of said, well, I know that the trim color is technically a different color in every room, but if I run around with this can that's close and do all these little touch-ups.
And you did this before the appraiser showed up. I
sure,
gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
So
you were using spray bomb in your house?
No. It was a can and a brush.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, but
okay. There's like a rattle can in your bedroom.
No. Yeah, mask it off. But when you've got a kid in school and you've got all these other hobbies you want to try to get to that you've been putting off for 20 years because you've had a house, you start to feel like, well, maybe if I don't really notice those details on a daily basis, if I just make them look good, maybe that's enough. I mean, I know that's not the fine home building way, but
gotta get on with your life sometimes too.
It kind of goes to the point that I think that it's good to have high standards, but I think there's every project you do, it really has a different level of standards. I mean,
Absolutely.
I worked in a house once when I was a remodeler, and the homeowner was an electrical engineer and was in charge of negotiations training for IBM. So he was all about
precision.
Standards and precision, and he bought handmade Italian tile to replace the hardwood flooring in the entire first floor of his house. And after it was mostly installed, basically realized that the lippage, the difference between the heights of the different tiles was not acceptable. And it's like, well, you've got to choose the materials based on what your expectations are.
Sure. So what'd you do?
We spot repaired it for about a week, pulling up one tile at a time, and then finally determined that the only way to repair it was to jackhammer out 1,000 square feet of handmade Italian tile.
Dude.
Yeah, that was a bad day.
I was on a stucco inspection on Monday for the first time. Southeastern Pennsylvania has an unusually large percentage of houses that are stucco clad, Portland cement based. And I was out with this tester who looks at probably 10 of these a week, he said, if the weather is good. They try and do 2 a day, which already indicates the severity of the problem, right? And he said they find problems behind every one of these stucco facades. And from the street, they look totally fine. But what's going on behind the walls is scary. At the same time, I was there while they were doing, an inspection on a house because the owner was complaining of they just weren't feeling well. So he was worried that they had mold in the walls. Just up the street, there was one of these jobs where they were tearing off all the stucco for replacement because of bad flashing details. And these projects can run into easily 6 figures, according to the inspector I was with. So bad workmanship is out there.
You were talking about that the other day, and it made me think about how when I was growing up, you'd see all those commercials for Garden State brick face and stucco, and that was like the thing to do back in the 70s or 80s, whatever it was, where I was living. And then, once I got into the building science community, hearing about how horribly all of that stuff was failing, and they identified that, that they didn't have the right water-resistant barriers and the right flashing details, and we've been building with more and more water-sensitive materials as solid wood has been depleted over the years, and all those problems were identified. But here, this is 20 years later, 30 years later, and you're still seeing the same kinds of mistakes being made in the home building community, and it makes me really wonder. I mean, we try to educate people as best we can about these things, but we're not reaching everybody. And is that enough? What's the answer to that?
I don't know. The EIFS industry, these synthetic stuccos that go over an insulation layer, they got their act together as an industry because they had to, right? Stuff's on a lot of commercial buildings. The claims are absolutely astronomical. Insurance companies are involved. Lots of lawyers are involved. So they got their act together. My hope is that the stucco business could do the same, but I think it's more challenging because, stucco is arguably just not a good cladding for the Northeast with all the rain we have.
Particularly on a wood sheathed building. I mean, maybe on masonry it makes sense, which is where it first came from.
He told me that there isn't a house that they look at that doesn't have problems at least somewhere. Yeah. And the other thing he told me that I found very interesting was that when the stucco is applied over a plywood sheathing layer with a reasonably well done water resistant barrier, it performs pretty well, and the rot is limited to small sections. He describes it as the size of a basketball. But when it's the OSB gets wet behind the WRB, oftentimes it's just completely compost back there. He showed me a chimney chase that there was literally no sheathing left. It was just the stucco. Once again, it looked fine, but there was nothing behind it.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that as we've built with more and more water-sensitive materials, that's a huge thing right there. I mean, my house is all built out of solid wood and plaster.
Yeah.
And I've found wood that was wet for probably years and still was a solid board. And there's one thing Joe Stiebrick from Building Science Corporation would talk about, and if you've ever seen any of his lectures, is that the more processed wood is, the more sensitive it is to water, and you got something that can last years if it's minimally processed to weeks if it's extremely processed.
My suggestion would be that builders should be using better sheathing, plywood sheathing, but it's the inspectors tell me it's very difficult for builders to want to spend money on stuff that doesn't show because consumers don't know enough to demand it.
Yeah.
And if you can sell the same house and make a few $100s more because you saved, a percentage on the sheathing, there's a strong motivation to do so.
Sure, and that's where the science starts to come in, where you have to think of the entire envelope and not just the material, because once you change one material, then you have to possibly add or manipulate other materials in the assembly in order for it to still work the way you want it to.
And I think we should point out that OSB is fine if it doesn't get wet, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that comes down to workmanship. So
if you have the right water barrier on top of it,
and someone's got to install it right and flash it right, and the siding or stucco guy can't cut it with a utility knife for whatever reason while he's doing that work. It's it's amazing any houses stand up, right?
Yeah.
Oh, let's get to it. So we got a number of good questions from the podcast mailbox. This question is from Michael Moran, maybe, of Annapolis, Maryland. And he writes, I live in a home that was built in 1984. I'm going to install vinyl siding on the house because the existing western red cedar is becoming too much to maintain and keep looking good. The existing construction of the home is 2x6 framed walls with R19 batt insulation. The sheathing is 1-inch R-Max with metal strapping used to cross-brace the corners, providing lateral support. On top of the RMAX is 1x8 tongue and groove cedar. There is no rain screen behind the cedar, and neither is the RMAX taped at the seams or sealed at the bottom or top plate. I've encountered some shrinkage of the cedar over the years, but cupping is very minimal. The finish has deteriorated and is now peeling. Since I plan on applying vinyl over the existing cedar, would it be best to apply a house wrap over the cedar? Also, from an insulation standpoint, is the insulated vinyl worth the extra cost in this particular case? Your expertise would be greatly appreciated. Who wants to start off there? I have one thing that I want to get to, but I'll wait.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things, but I mean, I think probably the lack of a rain screen is probably what's largely contributing to this finish failing to begin with. So I think, I mean, before I went the route of
maybe
vinyl,
we should tell folks why you think that.
Yeah. So the cedar, the siding isn't allowed to basically dry out from the back, and that's staying wet, and any moisture that's getting in there is trying to basically push back through the paint. And I think that is partly what's causing, the paint to delaminate or whatever finish is on there.
So the water gets behind the siding, and then it wants to dry as a vapor, right? It wants to get out of there, but the paint is in the way, so it's pushing against the paint. And although latex paint is somewhat vapor permeable, oil paint is not. Largely, and even multiple layers of latex paint are comparatively impermeable.
Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, you probably know better about
Well, so the thing is, the tough thing with retrofits is that, you're tempted to want to leave as much in place because of the labor and disposal costs and not having to start from scratch, because it's kind of like the difference between a new house and a retrofit is that in a new house, you spend a couple extra $1,000 to put the right materials in to make a better envelope and add a few flashing, make sure your flashing details are good. But in this case, you're basically trying to, layer all these different layers, and it starts to get really complicated in deciding what is going to work and what's not going to work. I mean, the one thing, I was looking at the Vinyl Siding Institute, and they were talking about covering up, going over this wood. They say that you should have a water-resistive barrier underneath vinyl siding.
And they say it's okay to fasten siding to cedar boards?
Well, so the thing is, for fastening purposes, I think in most cases they want to see you getting right into the framing, right?
Or solid sheathing.
Yeah. Although in my reading in the Vinyl Institute's instruction manual, I mean, obviously they say always defer to the particular manufacturer's instructions, and even the codes generally say that. So if you're working with a new material, rather than trying to write all that stuff into the code, they say refer to the manufacturer's manual unless something is actually conflicting with a very important detail in the code. Now, I had a similar kind of question that I posted on GBA about going over. I already have vinyl over cedar clapboards over the no sheathing on my old house. And, it was that way when I got there. And so ideally, I would love to add some rigid foam to the outside, and maybe that would mean pulling the vinyl off, put the foam on, put it back on. And on Green Building Advisor, everyone was pretty quick to point out that if you just do it that way, without removing the windows, without removing the old siding, your air sealing details are going to be really difficult to work with.
Flashing
details are not going to be to the standard that you ideally should have them at, and that the more insulation and the more layers you add to an envelope, the more water sensitive you're also making that envelope, the less ability it's going to have to dry, especially if you're talking about putting vinyl siding on the outside. And so...
Back up there. So why is the vinyl the problem, Rob?
Well, I'm just because especially if he's putting the insulated one, which he was asking about, because you're reducing... You got another layer of an impermeable material that is making it harder for it to dry to the outside. Now, the perm rating for vinyl is kind of a weird thing because the material itself is not vapor permeable at all, but the assembly,
the way it's assembled and installed,
the way it's installed, it has so many air leaks that it
dries really well.
except, and this is another thing I saw Martin Holliday mention, if you add the insulation to the back of that vinyl siding, you're creating less of an airspace, and you're also creating something that's going to block the heat transfer. So
that's the part I wanted to answer right away about this is so the insulated vinyl siding to me negates the best attribute of vinyl siding, which is its ability to dry.
Sure.
Now you put this foam layer back there, and interestingly, I actually have this material on my house. And what I find when I take it off to look at stuff or to do work is it's full of insects. It is completely full of bugs. Not living bugs, but dead bugs. And I don't know how they're getting in there. I don't know what's going on there, but stay away from that product because it takes what is good about vinyl siding and ruins it.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically trying to give you this added value product.
And it doesn't work by research. Research would indicate it doesn't work as adding thermal insulation.
Sure, because you're putting the insulation at the wrong place in the assembly.
And there's cracks everywhere.
Yeah.
So stay away from that. And I don't know what to say about, I mean, people put vinyl siding over wood siding all the time, every day. I worry about, without pulling everything off, getting the flashing details and the air sealing details. I think that's greatly complicated. Foam sheathing, I got mixed feelings about. What do you guys think about foam sheathing?
You know, I've been out of the loop for a little while, and I know that it was just like in the green building or, energy efficiency community, it was like
the thing
exterior
to do.
rigid foam. It's the only way to go. And then now we're starting to adopt materials that have been around forever in the commercial community, like the rigid rock wool, rigid mineral wool. I'm not sure that I can really answer that question right now.
Go ahead, Matt.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have a problem with this assembly from that aspect. I mean, I think it's fine to have that strapping and then have the rigid foam. I would have liked to have seen an air gap between that and
the siding.
What
about taping the seams?
Yeah, I mean, that should have been done.
Yeah, because the problem is you're going to have water getting through those seams into the wall cavity.
And
so I think that's no matter what you do, sir, Michael.
Yeah.
Tape the seams before you put vinyl siding over there if you can.
Yeah, if you take that other
the cedar
siding,
off.
If you take the cedar off. But yeah, because that's essentially functioning as his WRB.
Yep.
But I mean, part of his question is, do you put a WRB over this and basically create a sandwich of plastic with? and I mean, it seems like you have to because you don't really have a WRB there right now.
Yep.
By the time you're done building out this, you're going to have to add to your trim, just so that you can get it proud of the vinyl
so you're
itself.
either going to have to remove the windows, right, and reflash them and integrate them into the new drainage plane, or you're going to have to leave the windows in place and either pad out the casing for the additional wall thickness or add extension jambs or something on the outside with the windows there. And one of the things I saw in the stucco story I was just covering on Monday is that when the stucco is redone, oftentimes they leave the windows in place to save money. And oftentimes they have problems later on the road because they were either never done right at the first place or they had difficulty integrating a new WRB with the existing window flashings. So it's a hard thing to get right. I think somebody who is really conscientious potentially could, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, you're finding a way to flash into the window openings, and that doesn't happen with the windows in place. And, I'd posed that question I said about doing that similar kind of job to my house, and because I've got clapboards with no sheathing underneath them, they were saying, oh, well, you're not going to get, your air barrier, and even just mounting everything would be difficult. But with flat cedar boards, I'm thinking maybe it's not such a bad substrate. It's acting like board sheathing, basically.
Right. Yeah. I don't have a problem with that as long as it's intact. I mean, I can't really tell from the question whether the stuff is like reasonably sound. It sounds like it is. It sounds like
just
it's
the
just
paint
the
is
finish
feeling.
is coming off. Yeah. He has minimal cupping and everything else. So I assume that could probably hold a nail. But I mean, still, to be safe, try to get it through framing when you can.
Yeah, and you wonder then if you're not pulling this in the old board siding off, and you want to try to do some air sealing, can you think of, is there a reasonable way to try to attack that? I mean, by going around the perimeter of the walls, or
tape? And I think I'd go to Martin Holliday's backyard tape test for guidance on what the best particular tape is to adhere to whatever type of foam he has. Different tapes stick better to different things. Yes, I know that foam is one of the harder things to get tape to stick to.
Yep. Yeah. Good luck.
Guess what the stucco inspector has on his house? Vinyl siding.
Of course.
All right.
Now let's take some time for a little bit of housekeeping. This episode of the Fine Homebuilding Podcast is brought to you in part by Tight Bond. Bonding heavy materials to vertical surfaces is a real challenge. To meet that challenge, you need a durable adhesive with grabbing power you can trust. Tight Bond's Ultimate Tight Grab Adhesive has twice the vertical strength of most other adhesives and is uniquely designed for bonding a wide variety of building materials, including stone, brick, and concrete. Tight Grab is ideal for indoor and outdoor applications and is 100% waterproof. Available at building supply stores, lumber yards, and home improvement stores. Visit tightbond.com for more details.
This is from Andrew Potvin of Thunder Bay, Ontario. Do you guys know where Thunder Bay, Ontario is?
Somewhere up in the middle somewhere.
It is so impossibly far north.
Yeah.
If you go any further north, there's tundra. I mean, I think it's in the tundra.
Yeah, you got to take a snow machine or a plane or walk.
I only know where that is because I had a photo shoot one time in northern Ontario, and Thunder Bay was like so much further north than even that. So,
did you have to get there by snowmobile?
So this is a funny story. So anyone who travels regularly for business, if you have a flight out first thing in the morning, what you do is you go to the gate and you look to see if there's a plane there because you know it's not coming from somewhere else. It was left there overnight, and then you're going to fly it out in the morning. So I'm going onto this photo shoot with these drywall guys, and I look down out to the gate through the window at the terminal, and I don't see a plane out there. So I'm like, oh man, this is already getting messed up. And then I look again, and it's like, well, there was a plane there. It was just too small to see. I think it had 8 seats in it, and that was the smallest plane I've ever been on. There was no crew.
Not even a pilot.
Excuse me. There was a pilot and a co-pilot, but there was no flight attendants, and you could see right into the cockpit. It was fun, but slightly terrifying.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was cool. Anyway, back. What were we talking about?
Oh, this guy.
All right. Andrew is building an extension to his garage to make room for an art studio for his wife, and he has a lot of questions. You bet, surely does. The plan is to have the gable end of my garage extended by 10 feet to allow for a room to be built at the back. The room will be insulated from the rest of the garage, so only that room needs to be heated in the winter. So what is he doing? He's taking his garage and making it longer. This is going to be conditioned space, whereas the rest of the garage is not. So
how do you want to do this? Because I mean, there's a lot of stuff to cover here. Do you want to just kind of a synopsis of the questions?
So he wants to know, first off, what to do with the pad he's going to pour to extend the existing one, and then he wants to know how to build the shell. And basically, he's asking about the order of things, right? Wouldn't you just distill it to?
Sure.
He wants to know how to do this,
and making sure he's got the right layers. One, to make it work better, and two, to tie into the other building.
And I think we have some photos of this building, right, Jeff? So in New England, people do this all the time. Houses start out small, Cape styles, salt boxes, and what people do is you add on the end or the sides, and you lower the roof line so you don't have to deal with the overhangs and integrating the roofing material into the existing roof. And that's a great way to go. In fact, in northern Vermont, like your house, a connecting structure, and the barn is almost always continuous, and they call it continuous architecture. And they always have a house with a smaller intermediate building and a bigger barn or garage. And
that's the way you can get out to milk the cows in the winter without
and not have to
shoveling
go outside.
snow. Right.
Exactly. And it's a consideration when, and I suspect it is in Thunder Bay also, right? But his building is very low. Do we have a picture of the front of that, Jeff?
I don't.
That's weird. Anyway, so his eave height is like 8 feet, so he really can't go any lower, right? And going higher with an overhang is not really helpful. So I think he's going to have to cut off the overhang and start building his extension. You guys with me on that? As far as the pad, good practice is to drill into the edge of the existing slab, put in epoxy dowels, right? Dowels are short lengths of rebar that will connect the new and old slabs so they move together and not independently, which is the problem. Matt, you take the next one. So he wants to know if the gable truss can be left in place or should that be reused and a normal common truss be installed in its place?
He can leave that.
Totally.
There's no reason to take that out unless he was planning on like making that more usable space.
Like loft space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like loft space. And that's what I didn't understand. It didn't really get. I
We
mean, if
should
he's
probably-
got attic trusses in there and the rest of it,
We
then
should tell
maybe.
people what a gable end truss is versus a common truss. So common trusses have usually diagonal members making the truss triangles, a series of triangles, whereas a gable end truss is got stud spacing, much like you would in a wall, except the studs are turned the flat way and they're 16 or 20 more inches in the center, and allows you to more easily side the exterior of the building, which is not a concern when you have common trusses.
Yeah.
So you can leave that there. I would start with a new truss right up against it. You got to. He also asked if he could leave the siding in place until he gets this thing framed. I think that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
I think leaving the doors and windows is fine. Leaving it sheathed, maybe keep a cover of plastic so it doesn't get wet while you are building the structure.
Sure. He asks about, should he, if he has to strip it back, could he leave most of it and then strip it back later? But I mean, if he's got his sheathing on there and he's got the windows and doors all closed up, if he strips the siding, at least he's got a nice flat surface to attach
Yeah,
to.
and I think once you get started stripping siding, you want to just I would just want to get that done instead of making a mess inside the building then when it's put up, right?
Right.
Yep. One less thing to carry out through the door.
Yeah, exactly. So he asked how you're going to install the new shingles and ice and water shield. He's going to have to at least peel some of the shingles back to integrate the new ones. I went looking for what is called, I learned what is called a roof area flashing. And this is a way, like on townhomes, to make the roofs on the respective units separate. And what it looks like is a piece of flat metal with a rib that sticks up above the plane of the shingles. And if you can find that and get that slipped under the existing shingles, you could start shingling the other roof with that.
So would you pop up some of the nails and slide it in there?
Exactly, and depending on how long the flange is on this kind of flashing, that could be either easy or difficult, right?
So that will telegraph then through the shingles in the spot
It's going to
where it is.
show,
Yeah.
and it's just like a little. The examples I saw were mostly copper, and it was just like a little copper rib that stuck up.
So it's almost as if you took a valley and just flattened it out.
Exactly, it's very much like a flat valley. What they tell you not to do is try and use cap shingles to seal the space where the roofs meet because it doesn't work.
Yeah. That sounds. I've never heard of that flashing.
But you've
detail.
seen it,
Yeah.
I'm sure, on townhomes, right?
Yeah.
And they use it a lot on commercial roofs to integrate like membrane roofs with other types of roofing, either metal or whatever. And if you look at
It's a lot
box
easier.
stores, you probably see that.
Sounds a lot easier than trying to weave into the old roof.
Yeah. I would be kind of tempted to overlay the existing shingles, but I don't think that's good practice. Okay, so we're making it our way through here. I'm looking for a way to insulate more. My plan was to at least install 2x3 cut to 2 inches to the existing studs. So what he wants to do is deepen his existing studs with
2-inch.
nailing something on top, right?
As soon as I saw him say that, I wanted to give him the answer, and he actually came up with the answer on his own. Like, rather than spending all that time ripping something to 2 inches and burning out your table saw, you're ripping framing lumber all day long. He said, well, maybe I could just take 1.5 inch pieces and put a piece of 1/2 inch foam, which does two things. It creates a thermal break between
We've talked about the Bond Fig wall assembly many times. It's what Rob Yeagood put on his ceiling rafters. It's a little insulation piece that goes between the existing framing and Bond Fig uses strapping. And that's a great way to go. Breaks the thermal bridge and gives you a deeper cavity. And you don't have to rip like hundreds of feet of 2x into 2-inch pieces. So I would do that, especially where he is. When insulating the new room, should I apply a vapor barrier to the inside of the walls? Well, ordinarily we would say, gentlemen?
I would say no.
No, I would say no too.
I mean, if everyone's familiar with this, it's like in the 70s they came up with that during when the oil prices were going high. It's like, oh, we finally identified that air leakage is a major cause of heat loss, but
that wasn't really the original intent of plastic sheeting behind walls. It was to stop vapor diffusion, right? In the wintertime, the worry was that humid indoor air would be working its way through the drywall and condensing in the stud cavities. But it turns out that's really not an issue. The real mechanism there is air leaks getting around receptacles and at wall plates and allowing interior air, not vapor, to get in there and condense. So it's a thing that doesn't really solve the problem it was meant to. But however, in super northern Ontario, you need a vapor retarder because it is so cold. And diffusion actually becomes a problem in these climates. So in the very northern part of the U.S. and especially in northern Canada, you're going to want a vapor retarder. It has to be detailed correctly. I've seen Canadian installers, they use this red tape to seal the seams, and they use these like little boxes to integrate the vapor retarder around receptacles and electrical devices. So you're going to have to do that.
Is the craft facing on the insulation enough for that?
That I cannot answer. Do you know?
I don't know, but I do know that I've known for a while that once you get above a certain latitude that
a vapor retarder matters.
It's still it's bad, especially when you're in warmer places that are air conditioned, because that's where it really does the damage.
Condensation plane.
Yeah, because then basically what you've got is this rain wall inside your wall cavity, rotting out your sills.
And the plastic sheeting in the summer, what these guys are alluding to, is that warm, moist air from the outside wants to get through the wall, and then it condenses on this plastic layer because it's, especially in air-conditioned houses, it's the coldest thing.
Right.
So we talk about vapor retarders a lot, don't we?
It's important.
It is important. Did we get through all his things?
No, but do we want to keep going? He's got 2 more.
What's that?
Removing a window. What is the proper method to cover the window opening?
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah, he wants to, I don't know.
He wants to know if he should remove the cripple studs, right?
Yeah, remove the cripples and put in full studs. I mean, the opening is already carrying the load. If you wanted to put something in there as a nailer, you can do that, or you can take the header out and put in a full stud. I mean, I don't know that it matters.
I wouldn't bother.
In a situation like this, it seems like you just need the right blocking in there to get the plywood flush.
Yeah.
And
the only reason for removing those components is their thermal bridges. And in his climate, it matters probably a little.
Sure.
So if you're trying to get max insulation, remove it, put in a stud.
I wouldn't.
No, I mean it's a lot of extra work for very minimal.
It really depends on how much of an energy nerd you are and how much you care about that. But like you pointed out, the further north you go, the probably more important that is. So maybe it's not a bad idea, but it's I wouldn't put it on my top of my list.
I'd put it lower down on the list. Wow, that was quite a collection of stuff there. Okay, here's the next one. This is from TJ de Betancourt. He didn't tell us where he was from, but his question regards vinyl replacement windows. Hi, guys. I looked back through the old podcast and couldn't find much info on this, so I thought I would ask. I live in a 1950s Cape-style house in Rhode Island. My current windows are vinyl replacement windows that are on their last legs. Most have broken vacuums. I think he means the seal between the 2 panes of glass, right? So when that happens, they get foggy and they look terrible. They also don't work as well as far as insulating. And at least one broken lock mechanism. I'm not sure of their age, but they're at least 15 years old. I'm looking to replace them this fall, and I hope to get some guidance on replacing them with either replacement windows or new builds. The exterior of the house is vinyl sided over original wood shingles. The siding will be replaced in a year or two with new vinyl siding and trim around the windows. The interior is plaster with standard 1x-stain trim around the windows. I haven't taken the interior trim off yet to look at the rough opening, but I don't know the state of air sealing around the window opening either. In the past, I helped my father replace the original windows on his Cape with new build versions. It had cedar shingle siding. I am comfortable with the work required to flash and install the new windows, but I don't have any experience with replacement window installation and flashing. Lastly, if I go the replacement route, do I hire out the work or do it myself? Thanks in advance, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Go ahead, somebody.
So, this is actually a question I was just discussing with a neighbor of mine who just bought an old house that still has all the old wood windows. And it seems to me like the replacing windows, especially from an energy standpoint, is one of the most confusing topics for a lot of people. There's all these people out there marketing that's, change your windows and there's so many variables to consider because this guy seems like he could do a lot of the work himself. So maybe more of the options are feasible or affordable to him. But it's all a matter of what your goal is, because if your goal is just to get windows that operate better
and don't have foggy seals,
the easiest thing to do if you want to actually replace the windows is put more replacement windows in. You don't have to tear out the siding. If you know that your flashing details are already in good shape, those windows generally rest on the sill, so they're caulked around the edges, and if any water gets in there, it's just going to run out over the sill and out over the siding. The big complaint about the inset replacement windows is that you lose glass, but he's already got replacement windows, so he doesn't really have that problem. And then I don't know if they still make these. Maybe you know, Patrick, because you cover materials and products more, but I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe it was Marvin Integrity, I'm not sure. It was a replacement window kit that basically came with 2 sashes and these plastic spring tracks that
There's
you
actually,
put into the
2
jam.
styles. One is that you described that has like separate sash, and the jam liners, they call them, which is the sash's balance system. It keeps the window in position. They also have a unitized, and that's not the right word exactly, but it's a replacement window, but it has a frame on it, and it's meant to fit in the space of the existing sash. I've installed both, and I will tell you the latter is way easier to install than the sash kits and jam liners. Those are terrible.
Yeah. I did those sash kits and jam liners on a house years ago, and it wasn't unpleasant, and I thought that for the fact that you retain the same sash size,
that is the advantage.
It was not a bad system.
I think this guy's, in a way, kind of answered his own question for me, though, because he says the siding's coming off.
I know.
any year or two.
Yeah.
So in that case, if you don't know the condition of the air sealing and everything on those windows, and you've already had some replacement windows that failed, rip all that out and put new construction windows in.
And
I agree.
In this case, it's a lot of unfortunately, based on people's budgets or time, they end up doing things out of order sometimes, or they should be combined into a single project. And so what's the best way to do this in order-wise if you were going to do it, you think?
Well, the complaint, or a lot of the cost of putting a new construction window in or replacing an existing window with a new construction window is the cost of having to deal with residing and all of that, and all the trim and everything. All that expense
goes away.
Is gone right now.
Goes away.
He's that's already a sunk cost. I don't know if that's the right term to use here, but he's going to be doing that work anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And the new construction windows, I believe, are going to be cheaper than the replacements. So, like the excess cost of installing those new construction windows is, like I said, just all that other work. All that other work's being done anyway, so you don't have to worry about it.
But you kind of want to do both of those projects at the same time.
You do want to do them at the same time. If you want to replace the windows now and then do the siding later, don't do that. Just wait a year. Do it all at once.
I would agree. Yeah. I would also say that both in the case of replacement windows and new construction windows, the quality varies so much, especially replacement windows. There is some real garbage out there. So you're going to want to go to the showroom if you decide to go that route and look at the cross sections to see how sturdy these things are. I can't help but imagine that part of the failure with his glazing is that if you have a weak frame, it moves around a lot and it'll pop those seams, or seals rather, on the glazing.
Yeah.
But and putting in a replacement window like that is never going to deal with any of the sealing around the rest of the window.
Both air and water,
Both
right?
air and water.
Yeah.
So
I forgot that I had read ahead earlier and forgot that he'd said that he was doing the siding when I made my first suggestion. But yeah, for sure, if you're doing the siding, it's a perfect opportunity.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one quick one, Jeff, or we got to pack it in?
No, you can go.
Let's do this one here. Thanks for a great podcast. I found it a really fun listen while I'm in the wood shop since I've listened to all the Shop Talk Live podcasts. Is that a compliment?
Yeah, he ran out of fun woodworking podcasts, so he's like, oh, okay, well, we'll try
thanks
these guys
anyway,
out.
Brandon, for listening. I'm curious on your thoughts on home inspectors. Do you have any experience with them? Any recommendations for finding good ones, or should you skip them?
So I don't know this for a fact, but I mean, most of the time, well, I'll start by most of the time people deal with home inspectors. It's because they're mandated to, because they're
A real
buying
estate transaction,
buying a house.
right? Yeah.
You know,
The bank wants it.
I don't know if that's across the board everywhere in the country, but I know where we live that you're required to get an inspection.
I think if you are getting a mortgage, the bank is going to require a home inspection.
I do also know that, and maybe this is just in the situation of the real estate transactions, that the inspectors, they kind of walk a fine line, because they're I don't know all the details, but they're not allowed to open certain things. They're not allowed to go certain places. They're only allowed to inspect certain things on the surface. So a home inspector alone isn't going to tell you all of the deep problems that you might have in your house, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad idea. But then if you're looking for very specific problems with a heating system or structural, maybe you'd be really wanting to deal with a particular contractor or an engineer. But that's just sort of my first impression on it.
I've bought a couple houses in my life now, and there are two kinds of housing inspectors or home inspectors that I've come across. Mm-hmm. One is the referral from your real estate agent, and I don't think that is the best way to go. I mean, at a minimum, it is a potential conflict of interest because your real estate agent does not want to scuttle a real estate deal, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. The other way to go is to hire one on your own, and I think I would do that. I had a really good home inspector come out to my place, and I can tell you I should let him do his job better. It was driving me crazy that he was letting the water run at all of our faucets just because the thought and sight of that just drives me crazy.
Yeah, like, anybody who doesn't know already, Patrick, he really gets into the details, and he likes to save money, and so
what this guy was trying to do was see if my well would run dry. Well, so it wasn't 3 months later that my well ran dry, so I should have let him do his job. And he did a good job. So my brother had the experience where, and a friend recently had the experience where their home inspector actually hired specific experts for plumbing, the heating and air conditioning system. They have a termite or an insect inspection, all as part of the larger inspection. And I think that's the way to go, is to get experts in their respective fields, look at the house systems, and then listen to them and let them run the water if they want.
So how do you find that type of home inspector? I believe is it by state that there's different agencies or that they're supposed to be certified with? I'm not really sure if that helps or if...
We have to get some more answers on that.
Yeah, maybe we need to revisit this in the next podcast.
I would say talk to your
research.
friends. And I would say talk to your friends who have had inspectors find things. Yep. If they have had a good inspection and their inspector didn't find anything, I would say that might not necessarily be the right inspector. It could be just that there was nothing wrong with their house, but I'm more inclined to believe that they're trying to keep a real estate deal going.
Yeah. Word of mouth, Angie's List. I don't know, something like that.
Bought a house a year ago?
Yeah, a little more than a year ago, and we had an inspector. And I don't know. I mean, like you said, they don't really dig into anything. It's stuff that I could see myself. It's like I could tell that there was copper wiring coming out of
the average person might not know to look for those details. So that's not necessarily knocking the inspector.
Right.
It's just that we're a lot better informed than the average homeowner.
Yeah, and then right after that, my sister sold her house, and the inspector, who the person who was buying her house, they went in and they found like mold in the attic, and that all had to be remediated before the sale. So I mean, I can say in that case, the guy was worth the money.
Yeah.
Because moving into a house that had all that stuff in there, I wouldn't want to have dealt with that.
Yeah, find out about it afterwards. Yeah.
And I mean, you're already so tapped out when you buy a house, between buying the house and there's always things you want to do. There's new furnishings you need. Like,
yeah, you're throwing money left and right. I mean, you're just writing checks.
So like
it's
the
your
last
new
thing you
job.
want is a huge problem that you don't know about. And if you do know about it, you have a great negotiating tool when it comes time for closing on the deal.
Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, I think it's pretty much mandated across the board that you get one when you buy a house, and it's in your best interest to do that. Hopefully you get a really competent inspector.
Yeah. But I don't think they have any liability if something goes wrong. That's where it kind of falls down for me. Like, just because they did the inspection doesn't mean everything actually was good.
I'll say this, and then we're going to have to wrap it up here. But there's a very interesting op-ed piece, and we never do that in Fine Home Building, but it was written by Gary Katz, who is a longtime Finnish carpenter, and many of you out there will have heard the name. But he writes a piece on like what he got for his home inspection when he bought his house most recently, and it's a pretty interesting read. We'll put that on the show extra so you can take a look at that. You guys have anything to add?
No.
Good.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Matt and Rob for sitting here with me, and I want to thank you all for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. Thanks.